so Geno has picked a book for us. It's this book right here. And do you have your copy there, Clive, ready to go?
I do.
Yes, excellent.
Actually, I wanted to mention this as well, because when I ordered this book, it arrived very, very quickly, and Geno was amazed why it arrived so quickly, and I hadn't looked at it in great detail, so I had a theory. You know, they obviously someone had bought, because there's a big wrestling fandom here in Japan. Clearly someone had bought a stockpile of them and they hadn't sold out, and there was just one, and that's why I got it the next day. But of course the real reason is it was printed here. It's a print on demand book,
okay.
which is why anyone who orders it will get it.
Yeah, mine came pretty quick too, now that I think about it. Yeah.
I don't know if G knows it's print on demand, but
now, Clive, you might want to no, mine is not print on demand. Now, there's a couple of things. Firstly, the edition that you two might have is a second pressing, because what I have is the very first pressing, or one of the first pressings of the book, because there were some errors in the original pressing, and those have been corrected in, I believe, your copies, because I believe that those were made later on. Now, if you just flip to the special thanks section of the book, and you look in the last paragraph, in the third row, you might see a familiar name there.
Oh yeah, Geno Cuddy.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right.
Did you help to point out some of the errors? Is that how you got your name in, or?
Well, I helped see, the author of this book is a man by the name of Jonathan PLOMBON, and he is a friend of mine. And
you can't really see, it doesn't focus, but yeah, his name is there.
And Jonathan PLOMBON is a friend of mine, and because I consider myself to be a fan of the UWF and a bit of an admirer of Herb Abrams. Now, I could just hear a lot of the more snarky wrestling fans start to cackle, but I think it's primarily because a lot of them do not know the full story. They mostly, you know, what they know about the UWF is what they've read on is either what they've seen in sensationalized documentaries like Dark Side of the Ring, or have read about on various online forums with people, you know, trying to piece together this rather wild story of this wrestling promotion that lasted for 6 years.
So cease your snarky cackling, you snarky cacklers, and listen up. I mean, I have to admit from the offset, I'm not going to be bringing much to this conversation. This will be mostly on Geno and Nick, I think.
Oh, we'll get you to throw in though. We'll ask you some pointed questions as we go on, I think.
Okay.
But I will say, I mean, I you know, having just done a little bit of just poking around the internet on YouTube, like the first thing that comes up is an extremely negative, you know, 30-minute show by some guy, and yeah, the only other thing that I could really find is that Dark Side of the Ring episode, right, which is very much a gloss compared to what the book gives you, right? Like I was amazed by how much, I mean, I guess that you can only do so much, but I was like, they spent a lot of time doing dramatic recreations when they could have just given us information and facts.
Right. Right, and one of my main problem that I have with the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, and I put that in air quotes, that they did on Herb Abrams, which was called Cocaine and Cowboy Boots, the story of Herb Abrams and the UWF. The problem that I had with that is that they spent a majority of the time sensationalizing Herb Abrams' cocaine addiction, instead of actually talking to his family, which would have painted a more humane picture of the man and a picture of the man pre-UWF. Now, Steve Simon, who is Herb Abrams' cousin and is a great friend of mine, he confided in me and he told me that Vice actually spent quite some time at his home shooting interview footage with him that just ultimately never wound up being used in favor of some of these other guests who I don't think had any business being there. And and again, the sensationalism of his cocaine addiction. As I stated at the top of the program, I am a massive fan of the UWF. I actually have some material here. This is actually a UWF shirt. This is actually a custom shirt that I made myself, but it's based on the UWF shirts that were sold during episodes of their old program, the Fury Hour.
Just to, sorry, just before you carry on down that road, just while we're on it, I should mention as well, just to the point of Dark Side of the Ring and sensationalism. Yes, it's a problem. The only episode of that show that I've ever seen is the one they did on Collision in Korea, where they had the big kind of wrestle fest in North Korea, which is a fascinating story, and I've heard other podcasts about it. But yes, the Dark Side of the Ring version seemed like very much weighted in favor of sensationalism, and seemed to focus on like the least interesting thing about that whole phenomenon. So yeah, I haven't seen any other episodes, but if what you're going by is true and what I know, yes, Dark Side of the Ring seems like a bit of a missed opportunity to do things right, you know.
So I wonder if, just before we get into the UWF itself, because I have to say, I'm interested to know how you discovered it. Was it something that you saw when it was on TV at the time, or did you find out about it later? Because for me, and I mean, I'm not a big enough wrestling fan and haven't been to really to know sort of the regional stuff. I mean, I discovered wrestling, or pro wrestling, when it came. So if you were a European, if you were in England or in Ireland, we didn't get satellite TV or Sky Channel until kind of the mid to later 80s. Am I right in thinking that, Clive?
Yeah, and it would have been expensive, and most people didn't have it.
Like, yeah, so you might have one friend who, like, in the whole town, who had Sky Channel, and that's where you'd go. And so often wrestling matches were explained to you after you didn't see them; they were just told you heard about them on the schoolyard or whatever. So the WWF obviously would have been my introduction to wrestling, and it would have been the era of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Hulk Hogan when he was wrestling for the WWF, and George the Animal Steel, and that kind of era. And then I moved to Canada, and I'm still kind of aware of wrestling at the time, but I don't really come back to it till I'm in university, and my roommate Paul is a huge wrestling fan, and we start watching it all the time. Like, so there's about 2 years there, but that's definitely after the UWF. This is like the very beginnings of The Rock being a thing.
The Attitude Era.
Mick Foley is in the WWF as Mankind, and then I watched him transition into the kinder, gentler Mankind, and then all three. There's that one where he wrestles as 3 different characters. There's a Royal Rumble. Yeah,
right. That was Royal Rumble 1998, where he wrestles as, I believe, Cactus Jack, Mankind, and Dude Love.
Yes, which was awesome. So yeah, I mean, I would have seen the Hell in the Cell, the famous match where Mick Foley got wrecked. It was crazy, So I mean, that was a really exciting time to be watching. And I realized that the WWE now, the WWF is obviously, from reading this book, I realized that it's maybe not held in high esteem by fans of more other smaller outfits and stuff. But and I was watching WCW at the time too. But to be honest,
well, I think a lot of people, a lot of, let's just say, older wrestling fans, and I consider myself to be an older wrestling fan. I mean, I'm basically a pop culture historian across the board, and I love a lot of old pop culture, even though my age, I mean, I was born in 1995, the year prior to Herb Abrams' sad demise.
Right.
But I will say that a lot of people do have a bone to pick with the WWF, especially when Vince McMahon took it over from his father in the early 1980s, because of the fact that it seemed to be modus operandi for McMahon to go after a lot of these smaller territories and smaller promotions and shut them all down to put them out of business. I mean, one of the most ballsy things that he did was he went down to Atlanta, and he actually swiped the time slot to World Championship Wrestling right from underneath the noses of, I believe, the Crockett's down there.
Right.
Usually, Gordon Soley, the dean of wrestling announcers, would be hosting, and they would be seeing like Tully Blanchard, Barry Windham, and all these other people. But then, in a historic event entitled Black Saturday, McMahon took over the time slot, and you saw some rather lackluster matches with the likes of George the Animal Steel, Big John Studd, S.D. Jones, sort of like I guess at that point would be either the B or C level performers of the World Wrestling Federation, which isn't exactly something that you want to show your audience if you're trying to acquire a new audience in this particular market. So that didn't last too long, but of course, you know, McMahon would wind up buying out World Championship Wrestling permanently in 2001. So
Right.
now,
Now,
had you ever go
go
ahead?
ahead. Well, I was going to say, have you seen much live? Because I've only actually had the experience of seeing wrestling live once, and it was amazing. Like I had
Right.
such a good time. It was in Winnipeg, and Chris Jericho, because he's a Winnipeg boy, he was kind of he was the headliner. But like, I couldn't believe how good a time I had. I mean, I went expecting to have a good time, but I was blown away. And I'm sad that I don't live anywhere close enough to where we have kind of regular. It's a pretty podunk part of Canada that we're in now. So, but I would go again in a heartbeat.
I've only been to a wrestling event once in my lifetime as well, and it was I believe a pardon me, a independent promotion here in Connecticut called Big Time Wrestling,
Okay.
and the highlight of that was the fact that you got to see some. I believe Dolph Ziggler wrestled that night. No, it wasn't Dolph Ziggler. It was Jack Swagger. That's right. For some reason I get the two confused. And also making an appearance that night was Bret the Hitman Hart, uh,
Okay.
Demolition, Axe and Smash Demolition, as well as the Boogeyman, who I'm happy to say is coming back to the WWE. I actually had a great interaction with the Boogeyman. He was the nicest guy. His sign was over where his vendor's table was actually starting to fall, and so I quickly ran over and I placed it back up for him. And he was so nice that he allowed me to get a few free pictures in with him,
Yes.
and he was such a nice guy, and I loved hanging out with him and spending time with him, as I did with Axe and Smash and Demolition, who were one of the great tag teams in the McMahon era, the McMahon Jr. era of the WWF.
My only experience with live wrestling is this.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Flev. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. That's sorry. I guess I deliberately elided that when I brought up my experiences of seeing wrestling.
Well, no, I also had a very interesting experience watching. It's a legitimate. I got a couple of programs here. It has stars, it has these people, and it's still ongoing, I think. And they made a documentary a couple of years ago as well called Doglegs, about Doglegs wrestling.
Did you end up in that? Because they interviewed you and they seemed excited about what you had to say.
They didn't.
You're not in there. Okay.
No.
Because I was terrified that I would end up in there and that would be the end of my teaching career. Because
I don't know what the problem is. It's not.
Hey, George the Animal Steel was a teacher. George the Animal Steel was a teacher, and he wrestled. I think, it's like he would teach, and then he would go wrestle as George the Animal Steel, and his students would come up with magazines and be like, "Hey, is this you?" No. That's
awesome.
My twin brother.
Didn't he play Tor Johnson?
He did.
Edward.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah, and it was very good.
Better than Tor Johnson, in fact.
But anyway, but Clive, you're a bit younger than me again. So I mean, was wrestling, because it was huge for a while in Ireland, and in fact, my brother hurt somebody by putting them in a Boston Crab at one point, circa 1987.
It was big. It was big. Yes, it was big in the UK. We had our own stars, like Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks, and I watched that when I was a kid. But it was big.
Them, yeah.
It was big, and I can't remember the exact date, but there was a tragic incident where Big Daddy, who was like the Hulk Hogan of provincial British wrestling, accidentally killed someone in the ring, crushed their ribs or something.
Yeah.
after that, it just disappeared. It used to be on Saturday night television, and then it kind of disappeared from the TV, and then that kind of dovetailed with the rise of WWF around the world. Like you said, people getting satellite channels, and you know, that was so much more exciting than British polite wrestling. Everything was just big, you know, you didn't get the trash talk and stuff like that. Everything was just, I'm gonna fucking murder you, and you know, all that stuff. And it was just like, okay, we can't really go back to the old way anymore. I'm sure there is still British wrestling going on. It's just, I don't know if it's televised.
And if I recall correctly, British and I believe European in general style wrestling is quite different in comparison to American, because you guys actually use the rounds system more or less like what they do in boxing. There was actually
about right.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
There was actually a short-lived wrestling promotion, much like the UWF. In many ways, people saw it as sort of a successor of the UWF because a lot of the same people showed up there, called the American Wrestling Federation, and a lot of people didn't care for that because not only of the fact that it relied on a lot of older 80s WWF talent, but it also utilized the round system, which American audiences just were not used to. So that's the only reason why I'm familiar with the round system, is because of, you know, the AWF in the mid 90s.
Yeah. So then WWF came along, and I got into that for a little bit, but fuck, I can't remember. It was very early on, maybe even before I turned teenage, I think. I kind of lost interest, really. I couldn't tell you why exactly. And I'm certainly not anti wrestling. It's one of those things. It's on that list of, you know, if you had 5 lifetimes and you had more time, it would be something kind of like video games, for instance, is also on that list. Like, I just don't have time for them in my life anymore. And I'm certainly a big fan of movies starring Mexican wrestlers, like the El Santo series. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Other than that, wrestling hasn't really been part of my life for a long time, like 30 years maybe. And so because that follows on from that, I'll step into the ring. See what I did there? First here is, so this book was, for me, it wasn't, it's difficult for me to review this book because this book isn't for me. So it's not a badly written book at all. It's perfectly fine for what it is. But I was trying to think of an analogy, like, say, for instance, someone wrote a film about a not particularly revered filmmaker, for example, that I happen to really enjoy. And it was just a kind of meat and potatoes, just the facts, ma'am, what happened in that director's life and when they made this film and all that. Even though it might not be a great book, I would thoroughly enjoy reading it just because I enjoy reading about that person. So this book struck me in that way. I think if you're interested in Herb Abrams' UWF, I'm sure this is exactly the book you want, right? Jonathan Plommon's probably done a good job of delivering exactly what the fan would want. But if you're not already into it, I don't think it's a good entry-level book. Like, it's already inside baseball or inside wrestling, you know, it's in the weeds. So, but that's not a fault. That's not a fault of the book. That's just what I'm bringing to it, and that's probably all I have to say about the book as it is. So the floor is yours, gentlemen, because you both clearly know a lot more about this, and probably both got more out of it than I did.
I mean, I think I would have recognized more of the names. Like, it wasn't as big a stretch for me. Like, a lot of the wrestlers I had heard of. So you know, so that piece of it was maybe easier for me. And then it's just, I don't think I realized that wrestlers moved around as much as they did and do. Like, I think that was, I mean, I kind of, you know, I had an idea that, like, you maybe did a certain amount of work in more kind of regional wrestling, and then you might work your way up, and then you might end up back down. But, like, it's just the extent to which somebody like Mick Foley seems to be wrestling for everybody all at the same time was fascinating.
Paul Orndorff.
Yeah, you know, so, you know, these were big names for sure that I knew. but again, I didn't. Yeah, I mean, ECW I remember because they got a reputation for kind of pushing themselves towards more bloody, well, that Japanese style of like barbed wire matches and thumbtacks and almost backyard wrestling kind of stuff.
And that's where like wrestlers like New Jack flourished.
But yeah, so this was all new to me. So that's why I guess I'm interested, Geno, in how you discovered the UWF, especially since you're saying it wasn't something you weren't watching it when you were -1, or So yeah, how did you discover this whole world?
I think I discovered the Universal Wrestling Federation, like how many people of my era discover things from the past, and that's through a little social media platform known as YouTube. And so I had heard about this promotion for quite some time, and I wanted to actually check out some of the content that they produced. And I believe that just prior to recording this, I had sent both you and Clive a link to some of the video footage from the UWF. And I don't know if either one of you had time to peruse that, but
I had a look at a few. I had a look at a few episodes. Yeah.
Okay, and so I was watching some of these episodes, and I was finding that I actually really liked this stuff. I mean, you had Mick Foley in there. Yeah, sure, it wasn't like WWF caliber production. Okay, it wasn't even it wasn't WWF caliber matches. The majority, just to sort of build the picture of UWF and what their television was like, mostly would consist of squash matches pitting a enhancement talent, which is derogatorily known as a jobber, against a more established star. So like on the first episode of UWF, pardon me, on the first episode of UWF television, for example, you had Dr. Death Steve Williams, who would actually go on to become the Universal Wrestling Federation champion. I actually have him on a video cover here. This is a UWF video entitled Wrestling's Greatest Champion. So this will give you a visual of Dr. Death Steve Williams.
Not to be confused with Dr. Death Harold Shipman, of course, who was a shit wrestler but a good serial killer.
Okay.
Or Dr. Kevorkian. I think there's been a fair few Dr. Deaths over the last 50, 60 years. Anyway.
So Dr. Death, in his first match in UWF history, was against a wrestler named Adam Michaels, who was going by the name of Davey Meltzer in this introductory match here. And the funny thing about that is the fact that Davey Meltzer was the name of a notorious wrestling journalist who is famous for rating matches like -5 stars and giving out awards like worst commentator, worst television show. And even from before the UWF got started, Meltzer had an issue with Herb Abrams over some of the things that he was planning and some of the stuff that he announced. I mean, to be honest, some of the things that Herb Abrams announced at John Aretzi's initial conference, his initial convention there, was that he was going to be bringing in both Adrian Adonis and Bruiser Brody in. And the problem with that is that both men had been long deceased. Adrian Adonis died in a car
Don't bring
crash.
those guys in.
Yeah,
they'll stink out the place.
It's gonna make for some very discomforting wrestling.
Yeah, Adrian Adonis had died in a car crash, and Bruiser Brody died. He was actually stabbed by a fellow wrestler in a shower at a Puerto Rican wrestling show.
Right.
So, yeah. So yeah, I don't think Herb was getting those guys in, unfortunately. Another guy that he was
pointing out that, despite what this photo says as well, Herb Abrams didn't die of a terrible sunburn.
No. That might have been from the Florida era of like everyone complains in the book about getting fried alive when they were wrestling down in Florida with no cover over them.
So and another guy that Herb Abrams was talking about bringing in as his booker was a wrestler by the name of Blackjack Mulligan, who was one half of the famous tag team, the Blackjacks, alongside Blackjack Lanza. And the problem with Blackjack Mulligan was that he was actually in prison at the time for producing counterfeit money.
Right. I
So
remember reading that in the book.
so yeah, he was unavailable as well. So even so, Herb came in with bombast. He was, just full of energy. And keep in mind, Herb's a really small man. He was, I believe, no taller than, I think, 5'1", or probably even shorter than that. But he came in and he was this ball of energy. But a lot of people started to not take him seriously because of these names that he was throwing out. However, once the name of Bruno Sammartino came up, that's when people were like, okay, let's actually sit back and see how this story unfolds, because Bruno Sammartino was this marvelous wrestling talent. He's one of my favorite wrestlers to watch, and he was the longest reigning, and I believe still is the longest reigning WWF, now WWE champion, selling out Madison Square Garden, and probably, I would say, responsible for putting Madison Square Garden on the map as far as a wrestling arena. Because he always sold out that arena. And so having a guy like Bruno Sammartino on your roster, or, even if it's only in the capacity of announcer, was still a pretty big acquisition at the time. And, this is also divulged, is the fact that Abrams had a sort of a personal rivalry with Vince McMahon. And Bruno Sammartino was, of course, on a bit of a publicity tour, denouncing the World Wrestling Federation for not only the use of steroids in the sport, with Hulk Hogan being, the poster child of, steroid usage, him and the Ultimate Warrior. But there was also another scandal that had erupted that Sammartino had a problem with, and that was the Ring Boy scandal that had erupted, where, several World Wrestling Federation employees, were either caught doing, or at least were accused of sexually assaulting, underage men.
Okay. I don't know if I was aware of that.
Yeah, the main individuals being, I believe, Terry Garvin, Pat Patterson, and ring announcer Mel Phillips. Those were the three individuals who were implicated in the Ring Boy scandal. So
the Ring Boy scandal does sound particularly unsavory. It has to be said.
Well, essentially, the Ring Boys were young boys who were trying to break into the business, who, were hired by the WWF to essentially, set up the rings and make sure that everything, was all squared away prior to the big show. So all that was going on. And so here you have Herb Abrams acquiring Bruno Sammartino, the number one enemy at that point, public enemy number one of the World Wrestling Federation, because of this publicity tour he was doing. I mean, they were going on the old Phil Donahue show, Larry King Live, Entertainment Tonight, all these different outlets, just totally denouncing Vince McMahon and his World Wrestling Federation. And Abrams always, had a bit of a paranoia about him. I mean, I'm going to say this. I absolutely adore the man. I love Herb Abrams, and I'm so honored to be friends with many members of his family and a lot of the people who worked for him in the UWF. But he did have a bit of a paranoia streak within him, in that he was always convinced that McMahon was somehow sabotaging the UWF. As a matter of fact, it's told in the book, the first show that was to be held in Anaheim was shut down prematurely, and Abrams, thought that the reason for that was because of McMahon's interference. And so that's why when we eventually do get that you see on the cover of the book,
yes,
when we eventually do get the UWF championship, when Abrams holds it, you could see the F in the U, and when he held that on television, that was supposed to be, in a sense, him saying "fuck you" to Vince McMahon.
Yeah, it was held up like this, so that's all you see, right?
Right.
Right. But it's what I found fascinating though was, so at the point, so we have already mentioned this, at the point at which I started watching wrestling again, it was the point at which Vince McMahon started to directly insert himself into the storylines, right? It's when he's in every single episode, he's in the ring, he's actually wrestling, you know, he's manipulating things. It's this whole kind of, and what I didn't realize is that basically, you know, this is what Herb Abrams had done, what, 7-8 years before, right? And Vince McMahon then takes a huge amount of stuff out of the Herb Abrams playbook. You know, with there was the corporation, they were calling themselves at one point, and it's when the Rock turns heel. I remember this, you know, and yeah, I was just like, holy crap, this is, you know, he just lifted Herb's shtick.
Right, because early on in the UWF run, Herb Abrams was actually co-commentator with Bruno Sammartino on some of the Reseda Country Club shows that they ran in California. And I believe it was after about the 9th or 10th show that letters really started pouring in saying, you've got to get this guy off of television. He's botching the commentary. He's not doing, you know, he's too bombastic. He's too over the top. And, you know, listening back to Herb Abrams on commentary, you know, was he the most graceful of wrestling commentators? Probably not. But the man did have a passion for the product. I mean, you could hear that in his voice when, like, Steve Dr. Death Williams, you know, just like rushes into the ring and starts just wailing on Paul Orndorff. You know, you could hear like Abrams like totally disgusted and selling this like nobody else. And just, it's amazing, you know, that Herb had such, you know, the one thing that you can't say is that Herb Abrams did not have passion for wrestling. He did. He loved wrestling. And, you know, that is clearly conveyed by the fact that he wanted to be, and see, this is where we get into a bit of the tragedy of the man, is that really a lot of the reasons why he partied the way he did with the cocaine and the prostitutes and all that is because that was his way of trying to fit in this business. He wanted to be that rock star. He wanted everyone to love him and respect him, you know, and that's why he like took everybody out to dinner. He overpaid a lot of the talent. You know, he a lot of the UWF television, for example, you notice that whenever there's a star and a star together in a match, more often than not, the finish is indecisive, or somebody ends in a DQ. That's because a lot of these guys didn't want to be seen losing on UWF television, and Herb, not wanting to upset their apple cart, decided to oblige with that. And a lot of people have said that maybe if Herb Abrams had, you know, somebody who knew the business, you know, sort of managing that while he took care of some of the more creative and on-screen duties, the UWF probably could have stayed afloat. And I think that that's true to a certain extent. Somebody who I think could have really served the UWF well, as far as, you know, really helping Herb as far as the booking and some of that, was a wrestler by the name of Sonny Beach, who was also known as Rick Allen, whom I'm friends with and is a great guy. And Rick, if you're watching,
you know, Sonny Beach,
how are you? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Rick Allen, you know, is a fantastic guy. He now runs a firm, a security guard firm called the American Protection Bureau, and he's met a lot of famous people through that venture as well. Well, Rick Allen, you know, when you talk to him, he really has a fantastic mind for the business. And, you know, I really think that if Herb had listened to guys like him more, then I think the UWF would have had a better chance of staying afloat. Another guy who was sort of instrumental in some of the booking at the UWF, at least very early on, was a fellow by the name of B. Brian Blair, who was seen here in a UWF promo photo. B. Brian Blair, of course, being one half of the famous WWF tag team, the Killer Bees, with Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, and whom actually wrestled in the first and only UWF pay-per-view. Here's a VHS I have of it, the Beach Brawl. He and Jim Brunzell wrestled the Power Twins, the Devious Power Twins, Larry and Dave Power. B. Brian Blair was in charge of a lot of the early bookings and some of the talent acquisitions. As a matter of fact, I have in this envelope here that the author himself had sent me some relics from the UWF. I mean, here's something that I have. I have a I actually have a check, a UWF check
Nice.
that was signed by Herb Abrams himself, and I have packing slips going from Herb Abrams to B. Brian Blair. So they certainly had a deeper relationship that went beyond, say, talent and promoter. They really worked together on a lot of that. And interestingly enough, Blair's wife, Honey, at least that was her screen name. I'm unfamiliar as to her real moniker, but she was part of some of the early UWF programming early on, accompanying Blair to the ring, and of course that formulated one of the earliest storylines in the UWF, wherein B. Brian Blair was wrestling a match, and Cowboy Bob Orton and his manager John Tolis, the Golden Greek, come in and interfere in the match, and Bob Orton headbutts Blair's wife, and that culminated in a pretty big feud where Captain Lou Albano actually got involved and was managing B. Brian Blair, and kept John Tolis at bay while Orton and Blair fought in the ring at the Pennsylvania Hotel, formerly the Penta Hotel in New York City, which you got to give Herb Abrams credit, first of all, for actually having a venue like the Penta Hotel, because it was right across the street from Madison Square Garden. And I was just listening to, and gave me an epiphany. I was actually listening to an old episode of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight radio program, and he actually said something that was rather interesting, in that fact that when Herb Abrams was promoting in New York at the Penta Hotel, that was the first time in over 16 years that somebody other than Vince McMahon had ever promoted in New York, or at least in that vicinity in New York. Right. So Herb Abrams, really, took a lot of risks and chances. And on that first show, on that first set of tapings at the Penta Hotel, you had guys like Ravishing Rick Rude in the audience. You had Honky Tonk Man, and they were trying to build up an angle where Honky Tonk Man was going to challenge, I believe was going to be Paul Orndorff for a chance at a title. And you had Rick Rude making promos attacking, I believe, Don the Rock Morocco, who was a part of the UWF. Unfortunately, those angles in those interviews sadly got scrapped because of the fact that they were still somehow under contract with the WWF.
So, two things that I kind of wanted to just balance out a little bit here, both as the person who isn't as invested in this, and also I think might offer a slightly different kind of objective take as well. Is so one, you were saying about how, yes, in some ways he was very much ahead of his time, and those kind of raucous introductions and the ring as his, when he was a ring announcer and stuff like that, the commentator, yes, it seems so quaint now, right, that hyperbole and stuff is nothing compared to how it's gone from there. But also the other thing, I mean, not a problem I have with this book, because I understand that it is trying to take someone who's already been vilified on showing the other side of the story, but it does slightly cross over the line into whitewash territory every now and again, I think. For instance, when you were saying about, you bring up the point, which is a valid point, one of the reasons, the cocaine and the hookers and all that was him trying to fit in and all that. But for example, let us not overlook the fact that, another reason people do cocaine and hookers is because cocaine and hookers are a lot of fun, right? So I don't think it's totally fair to say, oh, it was just him trying to fit in. Do you know what I mean? There's that dark side of him, which is in the book, but and
I would say my question was actually was I suppose after reading the book was I never really got a clear picture. Yeah, I suppose what it was like. What were the demons? Because they come back to this idea that he has these demons, but it was never that clear to me either. Like what specific? They kind of, there was a vague reference to maybe kind of high school bullying or something.
Yeah,
but there was nothing.
On the chip, right? The big chips on the shoulder.
Chip on the shoulder. But I never got. I never quite got a grasp.
It says like, oh, this will show him, or now he has a chance to. But for what? It never actually said what that was.
I mean, by the end of the book, it feels like a suicide mission. Like there's no question. It feels like he's somebody who's decided he's just going to.
Right. So, but
kill himself in the most fun way he can, I guess.
is that missing from the book because it's unknown, or is it Jonathan?
That's what I wonder too.
Is kind of dancing around it and doesn't feel like he has the right or whatever to, or didn't have permission to say what it was, or maybe Geno has some insight into that. I don't know.
Well, so what is your question exactly?
What exactly
my question
led to him
is
having these huge chips on his shoulders, and what was he
And
rallying
potentially-
against? I suppose, yeah.
or potentially what led to him, I guess. I mean, because let's face it, cocaine addiction at that level is a death wish, right? And so what made him so hurt, I guess,
Yeah,
inside
because like Nick said, it says like there's some bullying or something like that, but it doesn't say it couch the way it says it in the book is it's almost like common or garden bullying that a lot of people would have, you know, there's different gradations, right? You get some light bullying, and not to make light of that, but and then there's full on, like, you know, character assassination or whatever, and there's nothing. I'm not saying it's not there in his past, but they don't actually spell it out. They don't actually say what made him so kind of vindictive and in need of revenge against whatever happened to him. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, I think it's pretty much spelled out in throughout the book, is the fact that he had these insecurities about himself, you know, considering, you know, his rather small stature and everything else. He always felt the need to be 10 times bigger than he was physically. You know, he wanted to, you know, be that big, loud, memorable presence. And I think a lot of that did stem from a lot of bullying he suffered in high school. I think a lot of it too, you know, rooted from the fact that his father, who had been traumatized during the war, you know, was kind of a bit distant from the rest of the family. And you know, I just think it roots from this whole idea of, I want to be bigger than I am. I want to prove to all the bullies that, you know, that just ridiculed me to death in high school. I want to prove to them that someday I'm going to be on top. And that's why, you know, he, I guess, had this addiction to cocaine and all these and all this, is because of the fact that he needed that constant drive in order to be that success.
Right. So he never made peace with it. He, in a way, he suffered from a certain amount of arrested development. Then he was always in that schoolyard in his mind. He was always, I'll show them kind of, which is, like you said, it's kind of sad in a way, because like you said, he clearly had talent and drive, and it's a shame that he didn't manage to get it from to get some other fuel for it, because it probably would have been a lot less self-destructive.
Yeah.
We are into the final few minutes here, I think, because I'm going to have to wrap it up. So I would like to just get back to the book. And so, like I said, I explained my thoughts on the book and coming from a place of ignorance. So that's what colors me. I get the feeling, Nick, that you kind of quite enjoyed learning a bit more about something. So I would like to turn to you to finish with, maybe, Geno, as the super fan. I don't think you've actually, I'm guessing you probably do like it, that's why you chose it. But what do you love this book? I mean, where do you think it's a classic of its type, or do you think it's so? What do you think of this book?
Well, I think, you know, and this might be, you know, considered biased, because I am a friend of Jonathan PLOMBON and the fact that I am listed in these special things. But I think that more than anything, like the Dark Side of the Ring quasi documentary that they did, as far as all the internet gossip, all the speculation, all of the dirty stories, all of, you know, the biased, you know, retellings of what exactly went down, I think this book more than anything is the definitive book, the definitive text, the be all and end all on the Universal Wrestling Federation and Herb Abrams. I do not think that that anything will ever surpass this book. And, you know, to give credit where credit's due, Jonathan had been working on this book since, I believe, 2006 or 2008. So this had been a real long-term project, you know, and he constantly struggled. He went through various rewrites and trying to get publishers. And I am so proud of Jonathan because he did such a great job with this book, and it's gotten universally great reviews. The only unfortunate thing is the fact that it hasn't really gotten anything really in the sense of mainstream press, and that's another reason why I wanted to do it on the show tonight, is because I want to help sell this book. I want to help get this book out there, because honestly, I think it's the definitive text on UWF. And I'm speaking not only as a friend of Jonathan Plombon, but I'm also speaking as a fan of the UWF and as an admirer of Herb Abrams.
Well,
And I think that this book tells the whole story, warts and all, without any sort of the sensationalism that could be found in any quasi Vice documentary or any of the online speculation that paints Herb Abrams as just this crazy maniacal monster, which he
Right.
really wasn't. He was really actually a really decent human being. Were there times where he didn't pay people? Yes, that's an unfortunate byproduct of the business that that he was in, unfortunately, as professional wrestling promoter, and I think he got in a little over his head. But he was a really good guy at his core. Did he rub people the wrong way? Yes, but he was a really good guy at his core. I mean, some of the things that he did, as far as his charity work, just a really decent, upstanding guy. To a lot of the people who knew him closely, and charitable. And I think that it's time that we set the record straight on who this man was, and I think this book does an excellent job of doing that.
Okay, good.
It's readable. I'm
I
gonna say
thought,
it's readable. I breezed through it in a week. Like I got into the bath every night, and I was quite happy to kill another 75 pages or whatever. I found it. So for somebody who wants a readable book about a piece of wrestling history that's probably not very well known, yeah, I can give it my 2 thumbs up as well.
and I would just temper that by saying, if you're already into wrestling,
Yeah, if you're excited, if you like
not an
wrestling.
entry- if it's not an entry level book. God bless you, Gino. Your heart's in the right place for wanting to get this out to more people. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if our YouTube video, who no one watches, will do that. But
It's
you
the best friend.
tried your best, and that's yes. And thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure as always to have you on as a guest, and thank you for choosing that for us. So until next time, it's bye-bye from me, Clive Davis, and which one of you wants to say bye-bye first?
I could go next. Bye-bye from me, Nick.
And
So long, everybody. This has been Geno Cuddy, and this has been a Davis Entertainment Group presentation. Literary as Feck is a trademark of the Davis Entertainment Group, which is also the home of the world-famous, critically acclaimed Magic Morning Wood podcast. So to find out more about the Davis Entertainment Group family of podcasts, please visit the Facebook group for the Magic Morning Wood Circle Jerk.